Welcome to Acton Unwind, an ongoing conversation on a free and virtuous society. I'm your host, Eric Cohn. Thank you for listening, and I want to ask that if you're listening to us on our website, that you navigate right now to the show notes for this episode, where you'll find a link to subscribe directly to Acton Unwind at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else where you listen to find podcasts. And if you like this program, please leave us a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts so as to help more people find our show. I'm joined today by Dylan Pauman, executive editor of the Journal of Markets and Morality and a research fellow here at the Acton Institute, and Noah Gould, alumni and student programs manager here at Acton. And today we're joined by a special guest, Alex Chaufen. Alex is managing director of our international work here at the Acton Institute. He was president and CEO of Atlas Network from 1991 to 2018, and is president and founder of the Hispanic American Center of Economic Research. A graduate of Grove City College and the Argentine Catholic University, Buenos Aires, he holds a PhD in economics from International College, California. This week, we'll discuss the Israel-Hamas hostage swap and the emerging sandwich shop monopoly. Yes, you heard that right. But first, I want to go to Argentina. I'm going to read here from last Monday's Morning Dispatch newsletter. Outsider libertarian Javier Milei won the Argentine presidential election on Sunday, this was a week ago Sunday, against a backdrop of record inflation as his opponent, Finance Minister Sergio Massa, conceded even before final results were tallied. Provisional results show Milei with roughly 56% of the vote. Milei has expressed a desire to forge stronger ties with the United States, and his plans to reform Argentina include shutting down the country's central bank and many of its government ministries and, quote, dollarizing the economy, ditching the peso for the U.S. dollar. Alex, this is something you know a lot about, which is why we wanted to have you on to talk to you. So why don't you tell us and all the listeners, who is Javier Milei?
Was correctly described there. He's an outsider and a libertarian. He's an economist in his early 50s. He describes himself, I am a professor of economics that now has the job of being president of the country and for a short while. He has a brilliant mind. I think his epiphany towards the free market must have happened like a decade ago. Influential forces, and you can trace them back to the history of think tanks. He is fond of Alberto Venegas Lynch, who is an 80-year-old economist, but whose father started a clone of the Foundation for Economic Education in New York, founded by Leonard Reed. And that took Milei through Venegas Lynch studying the Austrian economics. He also is fond of an anarcho-capitalist economist in Spain, Jesus Huerta de Soto. And he was just doing his own, teaching economics. And as you earn so little in teaching economics, he usually in Argentina, I was one of those when I was young. You work as a consultant in a firm or for an economic group. So he was working with a person who's now almost a billionaire, Ernequian. But he started to appear in media, and he has also this amazing talent, theatrical talent that came out slowly. So he started appearing in media and shocking people with some of his statements. And it was all amazing from there. You know, in the last 10 years, he started appearing in theaters, saying that he was going to revolutionize the country. You know, he has this special hairstyle or no hairstyle. And I was very skeptical at first. Again, in his path to power, he insulted many people, including many of my friends. So I had to, I kept a very low profile. But then he started saying he was going to appoint some of my best friends in the cabinet. And then I knew he has no party, no money, almost no people, that he needed the support of the what is called the second political coalition in Argentina, which is called Juntos por el Cambio. It's a mixture of centrist and center-left parties. And luckily they got together, because if not, it would have been impossible to govern alone. I'm still in awe, because I never thought I was going to hear someone who I think I'm almost exactly like win an election in Argentina. And I know, as I tell, some of the people that he's appointing, I know them for 30 years. So it's a great opportunity, but it is full of challenges. There's a lot of mined ground that are left by the previous government. We're on the verge of a hyperinflation. So again, it's a miracle, but with a leader who really knows his economics.
So much of the American media coverage of this has done what has been pretty frequent, I think, in coverage of elections in other countries, which is anytime a populist or a leader of some kind on the political right is victorious, it all gets shoved through the prism of Donald Trump. So you get these comparisons like, Trump-like libertarian, which is an interesting combination. I think you could say, from what I've observed of this, that in affectation, I could see where some people might make the Trump comparison. Like you were talking about his, kind of stage presence and dramatic presentation. Is there anything at all to these comparisons to Donald Trump beyond the surface level and his kind of performance affectation nature?
Well, for sure, but it's not only with Donald Trump. There has been a movement all over the world where many normal people seem completely left out of the decisions from the elite, and especially the bureaucrats tied with the big corporations. And each of these leaders, have their own personalities, their own weaknesses. I was in the beginning with the Fidesz movement that brought Orban. And they were the free market champions. I have seen the development that Bolsonaro came out almost like a miracle, with Austrian economics supporting him, with Chicago boys, with monarchists, with evangelicals. And then we saw it with Trump. There are similarities with Trump, basically also everything that has to do with deregulation. His support, he's also said he's going to move the embassy of Argentina in Israel to Jerusalem. Milei was the first one to start posting, the good wishes that he received from some of these leaders that are seen as populists. But again, each of them is different. Each has his weaknesses. Milei knows 10 times more economics than President Trump. Trump knows 10 times more about construction topics, than Milei. Milei, again, you could say he had a type of intellectual arrogance. Trump was perhaps arrogance all over the place. So, but again, it's a new. I think we'll have to get used to some of these disruptive candidates, but each one with its own characteristics. The guy who's coming up in Mexico now, Verastegui. He's mimicking Milei, but this is a guy who is mostly pro-life, pro-religious, whose strengths are totally different than those of Javier Milei. So so I think what I'm concerned is that each group, and especially think tanks abroad, who have people who never have been in Argentina, everyone wants to craft a Milei in his own image. So we say, oh, no, Milei has nothing to do with Trump. Oh, no, the other thing, Milei is only great champion of pro-life and pro-family. He's a mixture of in all those topics. But again, he's not only libertarian, but he came out as very strongly pro-life in the interview with Tucker Carlson. His vice president is even more conservative on family issues. So again, it's a new phenomenon. We'll see how it starts and how it ends, because it has not started, and he's already being blamed for the inflation and for the things he's not doing, and he's yet to finish appointing his cabinet.
So, Alex, we've seen a lot of support with young people, or just a lot of people who are totally fed up with the situation in Argentina economically, and I think we've seen a lot of people. I've seen interviews of people saying, oh, well, I voted for him because, the sane ones didn't do anything and we need some change. So there's a big need for some change there. As he makes these first kind of steps, what do you see as the early changes that he'll make and some of the hurdles he'll face right at the beginning?
I just want to note, Noah, real quick to your point, amongst voters 16 to 24, Milei won 69% of the youth vote there, which is pretty incredible. Alex?
As you know, in politics, branding is key. I'm not an expert on these issues, but I spend my life with experts who tell me, the importance of marketing. And Milei chose two topics which attracted the youth. The two major branding topics were his attack against the caste. The caste would be like the deep state, that I define deep state and entrenched bureaucracy and those interests who live for this entrenched bureaucracy. And dollarization. Argentina has governments that have been destroying the currency since the creation of the central bank. We had few exceptional moments, and some lasted a few years, but and those made him very, very popular. Some of the young people, because in Argentina, most serious contracts, we do them in dollars, but you have to go behind the scenes to buy dollars and exchange dollars in Argentina. Some of us would like him to do immediately allow people to contract in dollars, even if they suffer a little bit in tax revenues. It's crazy the amount of time you spend in the country just exchanging bills. The largest denomination bill in Argentina is equivalent to $2. So I was this morning with someone who wanted to deposit money in the banks. Imagine millions, because it's $1 to 1,000 pesos, and he was 2 hours just in the line because the banks don't have enough machines to count the craziness of bills. So that some of the young people think, okay, I'm going to be able to be paid in dollars, and this is a great improvement. They don't realize perhaps some of the costs that will come once Argentina normalizes its prices. So the first step he's going to do, he's going to convene the Congress again. And he's going to do a whole plan of restructuring the state and getting approval to reduce all these ministries and start cutting spending. Because now the two major commitments that he said he's not going to do, there's no negotiable. One is the closing of the central bank. And this, my friends, makes him an existential threat to the entrenched bureaucracies in the financial world. Because it's the country as large as Argentina can go without a central bank, this might spread around the world. And I think he would be open to have competition of currencies. First he speaks about dollarization because it's easier to understand for the rest of the public. The other thing that is a non-negotiable, and I completely agree with him, is fiscal balance. And he thinks it can be done in 18 months. And so that are the two key things. The only thing that he sounds like a populist, correct? Because what is populism? It is basically offering popular solutions and saying they will have no cost. So when I have to compare Trump with Obama or Biden, I have my list. Trump is saying this on the wall. No, that's populism. Now, Obama and Biden want to offer all this free medical care, free tuition. Well, that's populism. In this case, one of the key things that Milei is saying, that only the caste, the deep state and all their allies are going to pay for the cost. Sorry, that is very difficult. President Trump could not tame it. Bolsonaro could not tame it. The power Argentina has, Milei could appoint 8,000 people. 8,000 people are all tied to their jobs are tied to special interests in all the areas of the economy. Hopefully he will reduce this 8,000 people and say, we don't need them. I'm going to appoint 500 or less. But it is a nightmare, and it's a major challenge. I think my friends of Acton and friends of the free market movement are going to do all all they can, to support this effort to reduce spending. But again, it's a major challenge, and this thing, that the youth is the most important voting bloc for Milei. And again, in some of the poorest sectors of societies, they have also voted for him. But it will require, a sort of little miracle of Argentinians getting together for the common good during this difficult period of transition.
So I'm really curious about the role of religion in Argentina in general, but specifically with Milei. I know his vice president is particularly religious, although I don't know a lot of the details. But of course, in Latin America, there generally is a strong Roman Catholic history there. In fact, our current Pope, Pope Francis, was formerly Archbishop of Buenos Aires. Has he made any statements about religious policy? Is it just is religious freedom good in Argentina right now, and that's not a big deal? What is his perception of the role of religion in public life? And I ask this partly because I know in a lot of other Latin American countries, when people did revolutionary things, in many cases actual revolutions with guns and that sort of thing, they were turned against the church as much as the aristocracy, because they were usually deeply connected, and usually with terrible results. But I'm curious, what does he have? What is his faith, if he has it? How does that shape, his perspective on all of these economic issues? And just what does he view in terms of the role of religion in public life for Argentina going forward?
I think he thinks it is important, but he's searching. He's studying the Jewish faith. Allegedly, his trip that he's now in the United States was going to be to visit the tomb of a rabbi. He consults. He says, "I'm sorry, I don't have faith, but I'm deeply interested in these things." Argentina is, I think, pretty free on the topic of religious freedom. We are not as evangelicals as Central America, and not as agnostic or atheist as Uruguay. But the fact that he was able to be elected, despite having used four-letter words in more than one occasion against the Pope, it tells you, that there's something missing there with the Pope. But one of the key rules of Milei, and this again happens in other countries with elections, Milei, the people, are you going to forgive all the people that you insulted, that insulted you, and vice versa? What about the people who now want to come and work with you, but they have insulted you? And basically he says, look, he quotes President Menem, who was a Peronist who turned free market for a while, didn't improve much rule of law, but basically solved inflation for several years. And he said, look, no one drives the car looking to the rear view mirror. Now it's tabula rasa. From now, I'm open. I want to create the best team, the best national team, wherever they can. And in the last interview, a couple of days ago that I saw from Javier Milei, he called the Pope Your Holiness. Okay, and he invited him and was going to treat him with the great honors. He thinks the Pope can play an important role as he's a spiritual leader. And Milei has not only a huge IQ, he has an amazing, curiosity for important topics. I work closely with a lady she's the person who he chose as foreign minister, Diana Mondino. Acton did, during COVID, we did some programs with a leading university, the Chicago Boy University, and Diana was part of some of our podcasts. Diana was present in that conversation of the Pope with Milei, and it touched her spirit. She said it went fantastic. Again, your listeners might know that Acton works with bishops in many countries of the world. And as soon as we had this miracle of Milei, especially after The final act before the elections, Venegas Lynch, who's a mentor of many free market people, and again, I admire his staunch support for Austrian economics. Basically, Milei ended the meeting in the stadium saying that we had to cut relationships with the Vatican. And people said that was very undiplomatic. And Milei and Diana Mondino, the rule is, no, look, we are going to continue to criticize ideologies, but we separate ideology from the person and from the people. They just were in Brazil, one of the most important countries, yesterday, and Diana basically, when they asked him, what are you mending fences with President Lula? What about the insults from Milei? Look, Milei insults the ideology. We are looking forward now. Brazil is a key ally, and we are going to be distinguishing between the country and their leaders. And the same is going to happen with the Vatican. Milei is going to continue criticizing things that he thinks are wrong. But given that his president is even, I say, very, very hardcore religious, and that there's a very, good, the church in Argentina, several bishops reacted very well to the olive branch presented by Javier, and vice versa. I cannot divulge certain things that are being planned for the inauguration, but I hope it will surprise many. But again, that doesn't mean that the challenges and the disagreements will not continue.
Well, there's a lot there that we'll have to keep an eye on going forward, Alex. I imagine we will have you back on the program sometime in the future to talk about how things are going in Argentina as Milei assumes office and starts to try to do some of the things that he has been talking about doing. Alex Chaufen is Managing Director of our international work here at the Acton Institute. Alex, thanks so much for joining us for the show today.
You're welcome.
Let's go down to our second topic. Israel and Hamas reached a deal last week, reading here from the Morning Dispatch from today, that includes a pause in fighting in addition to the exchange of Palestinian women and minors held in Israeli prisons on charges or convictions of violent crimes for civilians kidnapped from Israel by Hamas during the terrorist group's October 7 attack. The agreement specified that Israel would release 150 prisoners, Hamas would release 50 Israeli hostages, and Israel would allow 200 trucks of humanitarian aid into Gaza each day. The 4-day ceasefire began on Friday and is slated to last through today. And apparently, according to the Wall Street Journal, there are close to an agreement on a 2-day extension of that ceasefire. So far, 39 Israeli hostages have been released by Hamas since Friday in 3 separate batches, and Israel has released 117 Palestinians. At least 19 additional Hamas-held hostages, most of whom are Thai nationals, were released under separate deals. The latest group of Israeli hostages released Sunday included 4-year-old Abigail Mor-Eden, a dual Israeli-U.S. citizen whose parents were killed in front of her on October 7. A final group of 11 Israeli hostages is set to go free today under the initial agreement, but Israeli officials have said they would extend the temporary ceasefire another day for each additional 10 hostages released. So I think we can assume from that Wall Street Journal story, if they do have an agreement, that we would be then expecting another 20 hostages to be released in accordance with that. Meanwhile, President Joe Biden has pushed for the pause in fighting to continue as an additional 10 American hostages remain in Gaza. Quote, "That's our goal, to keep this pause going beyond tomorrow," he said on Sunday. So there is this temporary ceasefire, and we do have an exchange of hostages here, which is somewhat fraught from the Israeli perspective because, on one hand, they are Talmudically charged with ransoming hostages like this. There's a long history of this. In fact, it was one of the main architects of the October 7 attack was one of a group of, I believe, 1,500 Palestinian hostages that were prisoners that were released in exchange for one alone Israeli soldier. So this is a problem from the Israeli perspective because in agreeing to essentially ransom hostages like this, that reinforces and continues an incentive for groups like Hamas to take hostages because they know that they are likely to get agreements like this. What do you make of what is going on here?
I mean, this is why the United States, as official policy anyway, does not negotiate with terrorists. Hamas is a terrorist group, and this is not the first time they've taken hostages in order to use them as currency. In this case, to exchange for Palestinian prisoners. And, I mean, just the whole thing, as always, is very messy and tragic. I think President Biden is right to focus on the American hostages. I don't think enough has really been said from our own leadership about that. That should be all, or at least primarily, what we care about in this conflict is our own citizens. We don't have to pick a side in such a strong terms as everyone wants to on Twitter anyway. And yeah, it's a mess. I think it will keep going as long as Hamas is around, and as long as this is the way that Israel does it. And I mean, I realize that leaves them with no good options. It's not, you don't want to give up on these hostages. They've tried to rescue them and largely have just flattened half of Gaza, including killing many, many, many more women and children and elderly and disabled. I mean, it's really, really bad. Some of the prisoners they're releasing, as you mentioned, some are, high-level Hamas people. A lot of them are women and children, or at least minors. Maybe they're teenagers. A lot of them
I think the ages are largely around 16,
right.
17.
The category of violent crime is actually very broad. Some of that is like they threw a rock at an IDF soldier, or they assembled unlawfully, which who knows what that could have meant. Many of them have been held without charges. This is not the United States, frankly. It's just there's not the same normal procedures, even for the accused, that you might expect. And again, it's just very messy, I think, and it's very tribal. As you mentioned, they're going with Talmudic rules. I've heard reports, although, I don't trust anything coming out of Hamas, but reports from some of the released hostages saying that they were told, the Hamas leadership said, we believe in the Quran, so we're going to treat you nicely or whatever. But ultimately, there's a very tribal mentality to both of these perspectives, and you have a sort of tribal warfare here. That doesn't mean that one is not worse than the other. I want to be very clear. I'm not trying to equivocate or anything like that. But it's not the same mentality that we might think of in our own context. It is bloody. It's been going on for a long time. And I wonder a lot, and it's been come up around the office at least, really about Netanyahu's leadership here, in that, there's a huge intelligence failure that is at the root of this whole thing. His government was already very unpopular. So you have people within Israel who wanted other leadership. And then you have families of the hostages really upset about the way in which Israel has been bombarding Gaza, saying, what about the well-being of our family members? And I don't have a lot of good to say, other than it's great that people are being released. I'm very happy with that. And it's great that there's a ceasefire and that currently people are not actively killing each other. But it doesn't seem like I don't know what Israel's long-term plan is for Gaza. Is it that they're just going to try to get everyone released and then let Hamas still be in charge after they destroyed half of the area? Are they going to try to occupy it again? Are they going to bring in the PLO again? I don't see any clear game plan. And I think that's something that if you are a supporter of Israel, and if you think the United States should support Israel, at the bare minimum, they should have a plan that is clear and realistic. And again, not an easy thing to do, but it's the sort of thing that we have this messy situation. We have some good news that hostages are being released. But I don't know, is that all it's going to be? If that's all it's going to be, then it's just going to continue this pattern of, capturing hostages means we get our people released, so we're just going to capture more hostages.
I don't know that I agree with your last point there, that Israel needs to have some kind of forward-looking plan. I think the immediate military objective is to extirpate Hamas from Gaza entirely and then figure out what to do next. I don't, I'm not a scholar of the Second World War, but I don't think that there was a whole lot of time spent thinking prior to D-Day about, well, once we win, what are we going to do in Europe? What are we going to do in Japan after we're victorious there? You win and then you figure it out. So I understand where that desire comes from to think, like, okay, well, what are they going to do long term here? I'm just saying that I don't think that is the mentality. I don't think it needs to be the mentality when there's a military operation on the table that the objective of has yet to be accomplished.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but my thoughts is this, again, there's this long-term history here. And so what are you going to do to make things better? And it really is not the same situation. In World War II, it was not clear that the Allies were going to win. Mm-hmm. There's no way the IDF loses. I mean, they're way better armed.
Well, that's a question
they're
of modern
way better. So, but
that's a question of modern warfare, right? So, like, if you were looking at like the United States' involvement in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, from the same terms you were laying out here, you would say that there's no way the United States is going to lose in either of those places. But we didn't win either. It eventually comes to these kind of draws.
You have to have more of a long-term plan. But then we're just going to go and get rid of the people we don't like. I don't think that worked very well. It certainly didn't work in Afghanistan at all.
I disagree with that entirely. I think it was working.
It was working, but they're back in charge now.
Well, yes, because we decided to bug out.
Sure, right? But again, we had no long-term plan. We didn't.
I disagree with this entirely. I think there was a long-term plan. I just don't think that there were a lot of people who liked what the long-term plan was, which is a different thing.
Okay.
Which is just a different thing. No, I want to get you in here on your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at how long this conflict has been going on, I agree with, Dylan, you just have to start with it's so fraught. There's not going to be any simple solutions here. And this kind of specific hostage crisis that we're undergoing, it is a global hostage crisis because we have citizens of all sorts of different countries who are being held by Hamas right now. If you look at how many hostages Israel thinks are currently alive, it's about 180. So even if it's 10 a day and they're able to prolong the ceasefire, does that give 18 days? I really doubt that Hamas is going to actually let all of these people go because that's all of their leverage. So I think what we're seeing right now is just basically a day-by-day strategy where they're just saying, okay, as of today, how many hostages can we get, released? And I think we should all celebrate when they are. That's a great thing that people are being reunited with their families. But, what is the off-ramp here? What is the resolution of this conflict? One thing to think about in just the history of the conflict is a lot of current Hamas fighters are orphans of previous wars. And so what I worry about is then, okay, the next whatever extremist organization, is that going to be all the current orphans that are being created by the current Israeli kind of bombardment and invasion? So I do think that Israel has to have, if not a complete plan of who's going to rule the region, they need to have some sort of goal of what are they going to accomplish at the end of this to actually help stave off this cycle of violence. And that maybe there's other players in the Middle East who could have some sort of tempering relationship, but it's a really difficult, fraught place.
Yeah, well, the big bad monster behind all of this is Iran.
Of course.
It is, Hezbollah is a cat's paw of Iran. One of the primary funders and financiers of Hamas is Iran. That is a question from a larger geopolitical perspective that is going to need to be addressed at some point in time. But I would think from the Israeli perspective, look, basically since 2005, where Israel leaves the Gaza Strip, unilaterally pulls out of the Gaza Strip. The way that they have been dealing with the problem of Hamas is what they call mowing the lawn, which is every once in a while there will be IDF forces that will move into Gaza. They will take out kind of where they know certain Hamas fighters are, and then they pull back out again. I don't think that there is a pronounced Israeli desire to once again occupy the Gaza Strip. There's a reason why it was largely politically popular for them to get out of it in 2005. So I don't think there's a desire to do that. But I think one also has to acknowledge that the previous strategy of, having left there, Hamas then becoming the democratically elected government, admittedly just once, there's been no election since then, and then just kind of hoping for the best, did not work out very well.
Right.
So
arguably it worked out worse.
Arguably it worked out much worse. So I mean, this is why I think this is why I think the mentality, for better or worse or somewhere in between, is, we are going to get rid of the personnel of this terrorist organization to the greatest extent we can. Now, you can't defeat them ideologically, right? You're never going to get rid of the ideological backing behind organizations like this. So yes, they are going to continue to deal with certain types of threats, whether it's Hamas or a different organization, long into the future. But I would say I find understandable the change in approach, considering the 2005 to 2023 period of time ended in October 7. They have to try something different, and I think more aggressive posture, considering what happened on October 7th, seems like the obvious way to go.
Yeah, I mean, I understand this as a reaction to October 7, although I think you have to every day evaluate, is this going well for us? Is this accomplishing what we want it to? But it's not a long-term solution. The current, bombardment and invasion, to the extent that they have in Gaza, you can't just do that forever either.
Well, I was going to ask the question.
But I want to back up, because you said you can't fight them on ideology. I completely disagree. I think that is the only way. If you want to stop this, you have to address the ideology. There's a great article Malcolm Gladwell wrote about the Branch Davidians in Waco, Texas, and how this is, for those who don't know, in the early 90s, there was this group, this kind of cultish Christian group, and they had a bunch of guns. They had women that people were worried were, not being treated well, and the FBI surrounded their compound. And they sent in negotiators, and the Branch Davidians kept wanting to talk about eschatology. And the FBI did not take it seriously, right? They just treated them as if all they wanted were material concerns or power or whatever, whereas these people were genuinely religious. Mm-hmm. They could have gotten a professor of theology to go talk to these people. Like, they could have taken another route. It ended disastrously.
Yes.
And I see that similarly. I wrote an article about our withdrawal from Afghanistan, that we thought in the wake of 9/11, we need to go in there with military might. But when someone is motivated with a religious motivation, every death is a martyrdom. They don't care about bombs. They don't care. Clearly, Hamas does not care about Gaza at all, because they have a spiritual motivation. I think you have to find a way to have that conversation. I'm not saying that's any easier. In fact, it's very likely harder. But if you want to make any kind of progress, you have to address, well, what are the spiritual concerns here that are motivating people to do these things in the first place? And as long as it's simply treated as a matter of our tribe versus their tribe and our power versus their power, the result is going to be more violence. Maybe you have some prolonged ceasefires, as we did for about 9 years or whatever, but then you get something like October 7. Mm-hmm. So if you don't want another October 7, you have to address the ideology. You absolutely have to.
I think the Waco comparison is interesting, but I think it fails in as much as I have very little doubt that Israel has a much more intimate understanding of the philosophical point of view and religious ideas that are informing organizations like Hamas, whereas it doesn't surprise me that the FBI was completely flummoxed by the Branch Davidians, and even the United States, to a certain extent, didn't quite understand the jihadi philosophy right after 9/11, although we certainly, I think, acquainted ourselves to it pretty quickly. I don't think that's a misunderstanding that the state of Israel has. I think they're pretty intimately familiar with it. I was just going to ask the question.
Doesn't mean that they're actually addressing it, though.
Well, this is, I guess, my question, then we need to move on to our final topic. is what if there isn't a solution along those lines, right? This is the Thomas Sowell point that, the problems without solutions aren't problems. They are just things that exist. I see this kind of in the same vein of when I listen to presidential candidates in the United States who talk about the Middle East, and they say, by the end of my term in office, we will have peace in the Middle East. And it's like, yeah, they've been fighting there for like 3,000 years, but I'm sure we're going to knock it out in the next 8. I just don't know that there is a solution along those lines. And I think that that's awful, and I think that it's terrible. But this kind of perpetual battling that has been going on for a very long time, certainly since the instantiation of the State of Israel, but really, honestly, for a long time, given the history of the region, I don't know that there is a solution along those lines. Maybe I'm overly pessimistic about this, but I just don't know that there is.
I mean, I understand what you're saying. There's no policy solution to sin. Absolutely. On the other hand, respecting human dignity, every single individual person having inalienable worth, has made seemingly insoluble problems at least vastly improvable. Mass poverty would be one of them. If you look at human history, by unleashing the creative potential of individuals, by actually believing in them, and treating them with dignity in a way that they never had before, it has led to the greatest increase in wealth ever, and monumentally so, that every day we see a reduction in extreme poverty globally. There are conflicts that people thought would never end that have. I don't think it's enough to say this has been going on forever, so it always will. That, I think, is too fatalist, at least from my perspective. I agree that it's a terrible thing. I don't have the answer. I'm not trying to say like, hey, if you just put me in charge, I could solve. I'm not trying to be that presidential candidate.
Dylan Palm, envoy to the Middle East from the United States.
I think we have to have hope. I mean, there are things like it's a terrible country, but Saudi Arabia and Israel normalized relations. Nobody thought that would ever happen, right? That's a huge improvement. Yeah. So even in the Middle East, things have happened. So
let's move now to our third topic of the day. I'm going to read here from a story in Politico. Amid its high-profile assaults on Amazon and Microsoft, the FTC isn't too busy to worry about people's lunch. The Federal Trade Commission is investigating if the $10 billion purchase of Subway creates a, quote, sandwich shop monopoly with Jimmy Johns and Arby's. I'm so hungry I could eat at Arby's. The latter two, in addition to McAlisters Deli and Schlotzsky's, are owned by the private equity firm Roark Capital, which inked a deal to buy Subway in August. The government is focused in part on whether the addition of Subway gives Roark too much control of a lucrative segment of the fast food industry. Roark paid around $10 billion for Subway, according to a third person with knowledge of the deal. I became aware of this yesterday when the senator from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, tweeted out, quote, "We don't need another private equity deal that could lead to higher food prices for consumers. The FTC is right to investigate whether the purchase of Subway by the same firm that owns Jimmy Johns and McAlisters Deli creates a sandwich shop monopoly." Dylan, how concerned are you about the emerging sandwich shop monopoly?
Well, me and the boys love the subs, by which I mean Quiznos. I'm amazed at the shade being thrown at the wonderful Quiznos establishment. I'm also amazed at the elevation of Arby's to be a sandwich shop rather than just a straight up fast food. I mean, it's wonderful. Arby's, great chicken, great shakes, great curly fries. I'm not getting the roast beef there. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know about you.
Arby's to me is like the most schizophrenic of all of these, right? Because the thing that they're supposedly known for is the roast beef sandwich, which honestly I think is the weakest item on their menu. But they have all these other, sandwiches and wraps and gyros and all kinds of stuff.
I mean, back in the day, I did get a 5 for $5 every now and then, but I don't think it's 5
We've
for
all
$5
indulged.
anymore.
Yeah.
But there's a number of things. So first of all, this simply is not a monopoly by any definition of that term. At all. A monopoly is one firm cornering the market. So they have no competitors within a market. Second of all, so there's not just one. I mentioned Quiznos, for example. Second of all, sandwiches, believe it or not, a hamburger is also called a sandwich. In fact, if you talk to our former colleague, Jordan Baller, everything is a sandwich.
Yes,
and
okay.
I think he's in fact right about that, to the extent that there's such a thing as substitute goods. If they tried to collude to raise prices at Arby's, Jimmy Johns, and Subway, what people would do is not eat there and eat somewhere else, which shows that they have no monopoly power, even if they had monopoly. Then, furthermore, the market is open. Look around you at every city. There are local sandwich shops able to start up and compete with the big bad, multi-state conglomerates. Why? Because it's not a closed market. It's a free market of sandwiches, thank God. And there's no monopoly there either. So this is the sort of thing that people obsess too much with monopolies, which are not
without knowing what they are.
Even if we had monopoly, it would not be such a bad thing if the market were still open and the local challenger could still start their own sandwich shop and make a profit. So what should concern people is whether or not a market is open and free or closed. That's far more important than whether or not it's monopolized. But second of all, there's just nothing to worry about here. And I mean, it's not Elizabeth Warren just jumping on this, is kind of the icing on the cake to let you know that it's not important and it's nothing you should be concerned about. She is just a bad take factory, unfortunately. She is someone that when she ran for president in 2019, 2020, she briefly had an opportunity to be basically Hillary Clinton, but more likable. And what it turned out was she was less likable than Hillary Clinton. That's how her campaign went, at least. You can't. Don't judge everything she says just based on reputation. That would be a logical fallacy. But look at what she says, and then just at least have some basic doubt and critical thinking to ask. But wait a minute. Given that this is coming from this source, maybe I should read a little more. And if you read a little more, if you understand how these things work, we have open markets, we don't have monopoly, and we have substitute goods. There is nothing to worry about in the sandwich shop world, economically speaking.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add there quickly is that you're right that it is not just. We don't need to think of this just as Subway competing against Quiznos. There are a few Quiznos still left in this country, not many.
Here in Grand Rapids.
Against McAlisters, Potbelly. You can go all down and list all of what we would think of as sandwich shops. But they're also competing against McDonald's and Burger King and Taco Bell and Five Guys. And if you're in certain areas of the country, Whataburger and In-N-Out, they're all competing against each other because there just isn't there aren't a whole lot of people that go out as like sandwich. A sandwich in that kind of platonic understanding of a sandwich is the only thing that I want. And I am diametrically opposed to the idea of a cheesy gordita crunch. It's not really believable, but it does lend itself to humor like this.
Yeah, so am I surprised that Elizabeth Warren is tweeting about this and worried about this? No, I'm not really surprised. I grew up in the great state of Massachusetts, and so I'm used to hearing all this types of thing from her. I don't think she understands really how markets work. And a key question in any monopoly case is, what is the extent of the market? And here, the extent of the market, you're clearly choosing between a whole host of different lunch options. And it's not just sandwich shops, so I'm not worried at all about this. I think the bigger story here is actually why is Subway being purchased? I don't think there's a whole lot of value left in Subway. Over the past 7 or 8 years, they've lost, I think, 20% of their stores have closed. And so I would expect that this private equity firm may actually close a lot more stores, revamp it, make it more profitable. I think that could be a really good thing because as a chain, it is not thriving right now.
Yeah, I mean, they are also, you see this in their marketing, responding to kind of market pressures. When you see the marketing that comes from Panera, another competitor to them, and talking about all fresh ingredients. Now you're getting Subway is advertising how they're slicing, the meat for each sandwich that you order rather than having it pre-sliced and stacked. The perception was that they were less healthy, that it wasn't as good for you, which is interesting because that was actually one of their original pitches. That went down in flames when they tied themselves to a spokesperson who turned out to be a very, very bad person. Which is one of the reasons why I assume they haven't gone back to that. But, go ahead, Dylan.
So another thing that's really important about this is one reason why the FTC is looking into this and why Elizabeth Warren is freaking out about this is everybody worries over buyouts, that this is market consolidation and this is the road to monopoly. It could be, but a lot of what a buyout is you have, as Noah mentioned, a failing firm, which gets bought out by a more successful one, and they have a similar product. So what you do is you consolidate. And yeah, you probably are going to close some more Subways. Maybe you'll turn some Subways into Jimmy Johns. That might be part of what happens. And what you end up doing is having a more efficient economy in the end. And I know people don't like efficiency because they say, oh, that leads to all these bad things. But you need to begin by realizing the opposite of efficiency is waste. So, if you're worried about the price of sandwiches, you should expect them to either remain the same or go down because of this, not to go up, because the resources will be better utilized, making the sandwiches that people actually want to eat and buy, rather than the Subway sandwiches that people have decided they don't want to eat and buy. So it's a really actually important aspect of economic life, this ability for firms to fail, for other firms to buy them up, or other larger companies, and to consolidate resources and to reallocate them in an economy. It's something that is important. It's not something that anybody's gonna, have a big fanfare and celebrate, but it's something that instead of being worried about, we ought to be like, oh, okay, that's the way it goes, and just move on with our lives, I think.
To Noah's point, I think it's worse than what Noah said, in that I think actually Elizabeth Warren does understand how markets work. If you go back and read some of her earlier books, she very clearly does understand it. She's just posturing for political gain. Although she may have a point in one sense, which is, I think, as everyone knows, if you give Big Sandwich an inch, they'll take a foot long. Let's call it a wrap there. A wrap, not a sandwich, but a wrap. Thank you for listening to Acton Unwind. If you're listening to this podcast on our website, please look in the show notes for a link where you can subscribe directly to Acton Unwind, or just search Acton Unwind on your favorite podcast app. Also, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, 5-star reviews only, so that more people can find our program. Thanks to Dylan, thanks to Noah, and a special thanks to Alex Chaufen. For the Acton Institute, I'm Eric Cohn. We'll see you next week.